The digital thermometer on my dashboard blinked a steady, unforgiving -12 degrees. I gripped the cold leather of the steering wheel, listening to the heavy, structural groan of the wind tearing through the mountain pass. The highway ahead was a solid wall of white, completely erasing the guardrails and the tree line. The state snowplows had abandoned this elevation 2 hours ago, leaving the asphalt buried under a rapidly accumulating drift that was already cresting my front bumper. I tapped the screen of my hardened laptop mounted to the center console, watching the GPS packets fail to resolve. The satellite uplink was degrading fast, the signal choked out by the density of the snowfall. My breath stayed slow, measured in the freezing cabin. I checked the fuel gauge, then the secondary lithium battery readout on the trunk, console numbers first, survival later. I had enough power to run the SUV's heater at 30% capacity for exactly 14 hours before the battery core hit shutdown. A sharp, rhythmic rapping sounded against my passenger side window, startlingly loud over the wind. I turned, my hand instinctively dropping to the heavy steel flashlight in my door panel. Through the frosted glass, a figure in a thick wool coat was standing waist-deep in the snowdrift. I hit the window control, lowering the glass exactly 2 inches. A brutal blast of sub-zero air hit my face, carrying the scent of pine and raw ice. The state troopers just locked the lower barricade. A woman's voice cut clearly through the howling wind, carrying a tone accustomed to giving orders. Selena Ward, the county coordinator, is routing everyone back down to the valley. But your vehicle doesn't have the clearance to reverse in this drift. You're pinned. I studied her through the narrow gap. She was in her late 30s, her face framed by a dark, practical scarf pulled tight against the biting cold. Her eyes were sharp, analytical, scanning the interior of my vehicle. She noted the server racks bolted into the back and the mounted terminal glowing on the dash. She wasn't seeking help, she was cataloging assets. I tracked the plow's telemetry. I stated, my voice flat to carry over the wind without shouting. They won't be back until tomorrow morning. Idling in a stationary vehicle during a blizzard with a blocked exhaust pipe is a statistical probability for carbon monoxide poisoning, she countered, her tone strictly factual, completely bypassing the panic most stranded drivers exhibited. I own a mountain cabin retreat exactly 400 yards up the access road to our left. It has a reinforced roof, a cord of dry wood, and a secondary fiber-optic line. The storm knocked out the highway. I am offering you shelter for the night. I ran the variables in my head. Remaining in the vehicle carried a 40% risk of critical failure. A permanent structure reduced that risk to negligible parameters. But she didn't offer the shelter out of charity. Her eyes kept returning to the flashing green lights of my server racks. Before I could speak, she leaned an inch closer to the glass, blocking the wind with her shoulder. A board member is pushing a hostile acquisition vote at 8 a.m., she stated plainly, laying her cards directly on the frozen table. If he proves my encryption has a crack tonight, I'm fired by breakfast. I need that fiber optic connection to monitor my network, but my grid power is failing. You have a mobile lithium server rack. I need a systems architect. She didn't blink. I didn't smile. We both nodded once the kind of agreement you make when you can't afford confusion. I need a stable, insulated environment to keep my own firm's network alive, and you need a firewall that doesn't rely on the local grid, I said. We split the firewood hauling. Grab your gear. Walk exactly in my footprints. I killed the engine, plunging the SUV into sudden silence. I grabbed my tactical pack and hauled my primary Pelican case out of the trunk. It weighed 80 pounds, filled with dense server cores and battery backups. I stepped out into the freezing void, the snow immediately biting through my denim. The 400-yard trek to the cabin felt like a mile. The wind actively fought us, trying to push us off the invisible access road. I broke the trail, using the heavy Pelican case as a counterweight against the gale, ensuring the path was packed down for her smaller boots. The cabin was built for endurance, constructed from thick, interlocking timber with reinforced storm shutters already drawn tight. The moment she threw the heavy iron deadbolt behind us, the deafening roar of the blizzard dropped to a low, manageable hum. The sudden lack of wind pressure made my ears pop. "Blair Murphy," she said, stripping off her snow-caked coat and hanging it on an iron hook near the door. Her hands were slightly red from the cold, but completely steady. "Justin Clark," I replied. I set the heavy Pelican case down on the floorboards with precise care. I didn't offer my hand. Pleasantries were a waste of bandwidth right now. I analyzed the room. A large stone hearth dominated the far wall, flanked by neatly stacked cedar logs. A heavy oak dining table sat dead in the center, acting as the room's anchor. "The fiber-optic terminal is under the stairs," Blair said, already moving toward the kitchen area. Suddenly, the overhead lights flickered, buzzed, and died. Total darkness swallowed the cabin. The wind slammed against the eastern wall, a massive, shuddering impact. Under the stairs, the router's power indicator flipped from solid green to a stuttering, desperate amber. The local battery backup had just kicked in. "Grid is gone," Blair called out from the dark kitchen. "We have 6 hours of router juice, maybe 7. "Then we move fast," I said, unlatching my case by memory. I didn't wait for her to ask for help. I pulled my heavy tactical flashlight, wedged it between the ceiling beams to illuminate the room, and went to work. While Blair pumped manual water and primed a small butane camp stove, I hauled cedar logs to the hearth. I built a structured fire kindling elevated. Larger logs angled to maximize airflow and struck a match. The flames caught, throwing a wavering orange glow across the heavy timbers. I pulled my primary laptop from the foam housing of the case and ran a Cat6 cable directly into her router. I watched the lines of green text scroll down my dark terminal screen. The rhythmic cascade of executing code anchored my pulse. The storm outside was chaos, a force of nature that couldn't be negotiated with. But inside this terminal, every input had a rigidly defined output. Blair sat at the opposite end of the heavy oak table, opening her own ultra-thin laptop. The blue glow of the screen highlighted the deep exhaustion around her eyes, casting long shadows over her cheekbones. She pulled up a series of complex biometric spreadsheets, her fingers flying across the keys in rapid, practiced bursts. A sharp, discordant chime erupted from her phone, vibrating loudly against the wood. Blair snatched the device. I watched her spine snap rigid. The air in the room seemed to thin out, the ambient tension spiking. "What is the status of your connection?" she asked, her voice dropping an octave, losing all warmth. "Stable," I replied, my eyes scanning the packet loss on my terminal. "Latency is high due to the weather interference, but the packets are resolving." "Someone is in my network," she stated, the words clipped and dangerous. "Dean Ortiz. He's the rival board member pushing the acquisition. We specialize in encrypted biotech data." I locked the primary development files behind a partitioned firewall. My phone just pinged an active alert. An admin credential just bypassed the first gate. "Show me the metadata," I requested, turning my laptop slightly toward her side of the table. Blair pulled her laptop closer to her chest, a clear, instinctive defensive mechanism. "This is proprietary biometrics, Justin. It's heavily restricted. I cannot allow an unauthorized third party to view the architecture, even under these circumstances." I understood the reflex. Trust was a vulnerability, a gap in the armor. I operated under the exact same parameters. "I don't want your data," I stated calmly. I picked up my own phone, turned it face down on the table, and pushed it an inch away to visually demonstrate the boundary. "I built the vaults. I don't look at the gold inside them. Give me the raw access logs, just the timestamps, the IP headers, and the packet sizes. I can map the intrusion from the outside without ever seeing your files." She stared at me, weighing the risk. The fire popped loudly in the hearth, sending a shower of orange sparks against the iron screen. I kept my hands perfectly still on the edge of my keyboard, offering no pressure, only a functional option. She exhaled slowly, tapped a series of keys, and pushed a sanitized log file across the localized network to my machine. I opened the file. I let my eyes trace the hex codes, blocking out the sound of the wind, finding the anomaly instantly within the sea of data. "It's an automated script," I concluded, highlighting the specific ping rate on my screen. "The frequency is perfectly static, every 4.2 seconds, on the dot. A human operator hesitates. A human breathes." This is a brute force scraping tool, leveraging a legacy credential to systematically test the logs. My lead developer, Albert Allen, assured me all legacy credentials were purged during the last security sweep, she said, rubbing her temple with 2 fingers. "Albert missed a backdoor in the API," I corrected, pulling up the specific port configuration. "The script is testing the perimeter. It hasn't breached the core yet, but it's knocking on every door. Can you stop it?" "I won't break in. I'll trace the handshake logs your server already recorded," I explained. leaning back in my chair to give her space to process. But if I kill the router now, Ortiz knows you noticed. He'll retreat and find another vector when you aren't watching. If you want to win tomorrow at 8 a.m., you don't just block the punch, you trap the arm. Blair looked at the dark wood of the table, her mind calculating the corporate fallout. What do you need? I need to build a shadow environment, I said. A honeypot. I route his script into a fake directory filled with dummy data. While he's downloading garbage, I trace his IP footprint back to the physical source. Do it, she ordered, her voice hard. The temperature in the cabin continued to drop as the night deepened. The battery gauge on the router ticked down to 42%. If that light turned red, the connection would die, the honeypot would collapse, and the board meeting would become a firing squad. I stood up, grabbed my flashlight, and walked to the breaker box in the hallway. I physically mapped the circuits, isolating the power flow. I shut down power to the refrigerator, the bedroom outlets, the water heater, and the exterior lights. I flipped the heavy switches with a solid clack. All remaining juice funneled exclusively to the router and our two outlets near the table. I've restricted the bandwidth and the grid draw, I announced, returning to the table and taking my seat. We have exactly 4 hours of guaranteed uptime. I used to think anxiety was just a lack of preparation, she said quietly, picking up her empty mug and staring down into the dry ceramic. Until I built a company that employs 400 people. Now, every variable involves a mortgage, a college fund, a career. You can't code your way out of human unpredictability. My fingers paused on the keys. The fire popped once, loud in the quiet, and I slid the mug closer without looking away. I recognized that specific posture, the heavy, silent weight of carrying a perimeter entirely alone. I didn't offer empty platitudes. I pushed my chair back, walked over to the camp stove, and ignited the butane. I boiled fresh water, poured it slowly over the instant coffee grounds, and carried it back. I set the hot mug down exactly 3 inches from her hand, close enough to feel the heat, far enough not to crowd her space. You can't control the unpredictability, I agreed softly, looking at the steam rising between us. But you can build a stronger hull. She looked at the mug, then up at me. She took it, the warmth clearly seeping into her skin and unknotting a fraction of the tension in her jaw. Thank you, Justin. At 1 a.m., the diagnostic dashboard on my secondary monitor flashed a harsh yellow warning. What is it? Blair asked, her eyes darting from her spreadsheet to my screen. The ambient temperature near the floor just dropped past the safe operating threshold for the lithium core, I explained, checking the rapidly fluctuating voltage output. The battery is spending too much energy trying to keep itself warm against the floorboards. If it drops another 3 degrees, it triggers an automatic thermal shutdown. We needed to restrict the airflow and trap the heat. We are going to build a microclimate, I said, standing up. Grab that end of the table. We dragged the heavy oak table 6 feet toward the hearth. The wood groaned loudly against the floorboards. Then, we positioned the heavy leather sofa directly behind it, creating a physical barricade that trapped the radiant heat from the fire in a tight 10 by 10 square. I checked the telemetry. The voltage stabilized. The yellow warning light vanished from the screen. Blair sank onto the sofa, absently massaging her right wrist, a repetitive stress tale from hours of rigid, non-stop typing under high adrenaline. I walked to my tactical pack, extracted a self-heating chemical pack designed for winter survival, cracked the seal to activate the compound, and set it on the table near her hand. Your board can wait, I said, a faint, dry note of teasing in my voice. Your hands can't. A compromised joint reduces typing efficiency by 18%. She looked at the heat pack, letting out a short, genuine laugh that broke the heavy tension in the room. You really do process everything as data. Data keeps the network alive, I replied, sitting back down. At 1:15 a.m., a repetitive, high-pitched rattling started near the kitchen window. The storm wind was catching a loose iron latch on the exterior frame, vibrating it against the heavy glass every 7 seconds. It was a minor mechanical failure, but in the compressed silence of our microclimate, it was chewing at her focus. I watched Blair's jaw tighten every time the latch hit the glass. She was dedicating mental processing power to tuning it out instead of defending her network. I didn't ask if it bothered her. I stood up, pulled my steel multi-tool from my belt, and walked out of the heat zone into the freezing kitchen sector. I inspected the latch, The catch was worn down by a millimeter, a structural vulnerability allowing the wind to find purchase. I found a small sliver of split cedar near the hearth, wedged it precisely behind the iron catch, and snapped the latch down with a solid, immovable click. The rattling stopped instantly. Absolute insulated silence returned to the cabin. I walked back to the heat zone and sat down. "You patched the physical firewall," Blair noted without looking away from her screen, though the rigid tension in her neck had visibly unwound. "I prefer optimal conditions," I replied, tracking a new line of code. "I've owned this cabin for 4 years," she said softly. "That latch has rattled during every storm. I always just put on noise-canceling headphones." "Headphones treat the symptom," I pointed out. "Fixing the latch cures the disease." She finally looked up, her dark eyes studying me across the table with a new layer of comprehension. "You really don't tolerate broken systems, do you?" "No," I said simply. "I don't." At 1:45 a.m., the quiet inside our microclimate was broken by the distinct rumble of my stomach. I hadn't eaten since noon. I unzipped the side compartment of my tactical pack and pulled out 2 compressed survival rations. I tossed one across the table. It landed next to her mousepad with a dull thud. 200 calories, I stated, tearing the foil wrapper off mine. "Eat it. Your brain is burning glycogen at a sprint pace." Blair looked at the silver foil, then picked it up. "It looks like military surplus." "It is," I confirmed, taking a bite. "It tastes like sawdust and peanut butter, but it keeps the system running." She unwrapped it, took a small bite, and chewed slowly. The faint grimace on her face confirmed my flavor profile, but she didn't put it down. She ate the whole thing, chasing it with the last of her coffee. "You operate like a soldier, Justin," she noted, brushing a crumb from her keyboard. "Everything is triage and resource management. Who taught you that?" "A failed startup," I answered flatly, keeping my eyes on my terminal. 5 years ago, I trusted a partner with the architecture. He sold the back doors to a data broker. I lost the company, the code, and 3 years of sleep. I decided then I would never leave a perimeter unguarded again. Blair stopped typing. She looked at me, really seeing the architecture of my defenses. She didn't offer a pitying look or a therapy cliché. She just nodded once, a gesture of absolute, shared understanding between 2 people who had built walls to survive. "Watch my back," she said softly. "I'll watch yours," I replied. She picked up her phone, pulling up a drafting application. I watched her thumbs fly across the small keyboard. She was writing crisis management emails to her board, trying to fight a corporate war on a 6-inch screen with a degrading battery. I reached across the narrow gap between us. I didn't grab her hand. I simply placed my fingers over the top edge of her phone and pressed it gently, face down, against the wood of the table. Blair froze, looking up at me sharply, her eyes flashing. "You're burning cognitive calories on hypotheticals," I stated, my voice holding a calm, immovable boundary. "Your phone battery is at 19%. The board cannot receive your emails because the county cell towers are down. Your actions right now are purely stress responses, not solutions." She stared at the back of her phone case, her jaw tight. "If I'm not moving forward, I'm losing ground. If you don't rest your primary processor, you won't have the bandwidth to execute the solution when the network actually comes back online." I corrected her. I slid the chemical heat pack a fraction closer to her hand. "Conserve your battery. Conserve your focus." She exhaled slowly, the fight draining out of her shoulders. She didn't pick the phone back up. She rested her wrist against the warmth of the pack. "Fine, but if that script breaks the firewall, you wake me up immediately. You'll be the first to know," I promised. At 2:14 a.m., the midpoint of the storm, my screen flashed a violent red. "He bypassed the honeypot," I said sharply, my hands slamming onto the keyboard, rapidly typing a containment protocol. The script mutated. It bypassed the fake directory and hit the core archive. Blair stood up so fast the table shook. "What did they take?" I analyzed the packet loss, watching the data bleed out. One file, a PDF, 8 megabytes. "The internal audit from 2023, she whispered, her face going entirely pale in the firelight. "There was a flaw in our anonymization algorithm back then. I patched it in 48 hours and reported it to compliance. But Ortiz wasn't on the board then. Without the compliance receipt, he'll frame the raw audit as a systemic cover-up." A new email pinged loudly on her laptop. From Dean Ortiz, copied to the entire board. "Emergency motion to terminate CEO." Her cursor froze. The email subject line sat there on the screen like a blade. "He locked my admin access," Blair said, her voice shaking slightly as she hit her spacebar over and over. "I can't even log into the main server to retrieve the compliance receipt to defend myself." My jaw locked. I set the Ethernet cable down on the desk too carefully, deliberately controlling the force so the plastic connector wouldn't snap in my hand. Ortiz was using policy as a weapon. "I am shutting down the automated trackers," I stated, pulling the main Ethernet line from her router and plugging it directly into my hardened laptop, bypassing her machine entirely. "He assumes, because you are locked out of the user interface, you cannot access the data." "I can't," she said, staring at her locked screen. "You can't," I corrected, bringing up a raw command prompt. "I can. I am going to utilize a diagnostic ping to request the server's handshake history. When Ortiz downloaded that file, his script left a footprint. You can trace it? I can trace the IP, pull the account audit trail, and isolate the source," I confirmed, my eyes never leaving the code. "We preserve the chain of custody, but I need you to authorize a third-party forensic audit on paper. Right now." Blair grabbed a pen and a legal pad, rapidly drafting a formal authorization for my firm to conduct an emergency forensic analysis on her network. She signed it with a hard slash of ink and slid it across the table. "Initiating the trace," I said, "but the battery backup is at 9%. I'm killing the GUI to save power. Close your laptop lid." She hesitated. Closing her machine meant fully surrendering control, but then the blue glow of her screen vanished. The darkness was absolute, heavy and suffocating. Without the visual anchor of the screens, the structural groan of the cabin under the wind became magnified. I kept my hands hovering over the keys, waiting for the audio prompts from the terminal. A low beep, a double click. I translated the sounds into command lines in my head, typing blind. "It's strange," Blair whispered, her voice sounding closer than it was. "I pay millions of dollars a year for physical security, biometric scanners, and server vaults. And right now, the only thing keeping my company alive is a guy I met in a snowdrift typing in the dark." "Security isn't a vault," I murmured. Hitting the return key as a high-pitched chime signaled a successful directory bypass. "It's a process. It's only as strong as the person maintaining the logs." I could hear the rustle of her wool coat as she shifted on the sofa. "Are you ever off the clock?" "Hackers don't sleep," I replied, "so I don't either." "You have to sleep eventually, Justin." "I sleep when the perimeter is secure." Another chime echoed from the laptop. A long, sustained tone. I hit the spacebar. The screen flared back to life, illuminating our faces with a massive string of numbers. "The IP resolves to an Aspen residential block," I read aloud, tracing the final node. Blair pulled up her offline contacts on her phone. She did the human part. "Dean Ortiz owns a secondary residence in Aspen. It matches the zip code." "We generated a sealed incident report," I said, hitting the command to export an encrypted PDF. "The timestamps and source IP prove an unauthorized extraction using a legacy key. Chain of custody is intact." "Print it," she ordered. I connected the portable thermal printer. It whirred to life, feeding the paper through. But at exactly 7:45 a.m., just as page 2 started, the battery indicator flashed critical. 5%. The printer choked, a mechanical grind halting the paper feed. Blair tensed, leaning forward. "Did we lose it?" I didn't curse. I popped the plastic latch on the printer housing, smoothly cleared the jammed thermal roll, realigned the paper against the heat element, and pressed the manual feed override. The machine whirred again, spitting out pages 2 and 3 right as the battery hit 4%. I handed her the hard, undeniable evidence. Blair picked them up, a slow, precise smile forming on her lips. It was the smile of a CEO who had just been handed a loaded weapon. At 7:55 a.m., the storm broke, the wind died down, and brilliant, blinding sunlight pierced the gaps in the shutters. The cabin was freezing, the fire reduced to white ash. Blair sat at the table, her posture rigid once again. She had smoothed her hair back, buttoned her silk blouse to the collar, and arranged her posture into a picture of flawless corporate authority. Only the dark circles under her eyes betrayed the 12-hour war we had just fought. I walked over to my Pelican case, pulled out a clean microfiber cloth, and handed it to her. "Your webcam lens is smudged," I observed quietly. "Optics matter. Make them see you clearly." She took the cloth, a flicker of profound gratitude in her exhausted eyes, and meticulously wiped the small glass circle at the top of her screen. At 8 a.m., the battery backup had exactly 3% remaining. Blair opened a direct video conference link. The faces of 12 board members populated the screen, with Dean Ortiz sitting dead center, looking smug in a leather office chair. Blair, we received a highly concerning document regarding a historical vulnerability. The chairman started, his tone grave. I am aware, Blair said, her voice perfectly calibrated, devoid of the panic she had felt hours ago. Before we discuss the 2023 audit, which was fully resolved and reported to compliance, I am introducing Justin Clark, an independent forensic systems architect. She adjusted the webcam so I was in the frame. I kept my posture neutral, my face unreadable. At 2:14 a.m., the primary server was breached via a deprecated legacy credential. I stated directly to the camera, my voice projecting clinical authority. The script extracted a single internal audit file. The attack originated from an IP block registered to Mr. Dean Ortiz in Aspen, Colorado. We preserved the access logs, timestamps, and source IP evidence for counsel. Chain of custody is intact. Ortiz's face lost all color, his smugness evaporating instantly. You authorized an audit without board approval? In an active breach, the CEO holds unilateral authority. Blair recited flawlessly. The threat is neutralized. I expect a formal motion to remove Dean Ortiz from this board by noon. Additionally, Albert Allen is suspended pending a compliance review of his vault logs regarding the legacy credential. Ortiz abruptly disconnected, his square vanishing from the grid. The chairman, visibly shaken, immediately moved to restore Blair's access. She ended the call. The screen went black. The cabin was utterly silent. Her knees softened. She swayed, her hand hitting the oak table. The ceramic coffee mug rattled sharply against the wood as the 12 hours of adrenaline violently evaporated. I moved instantly, stepping into her space. I gripped her upper arms firm, stabilizing and entirely clinical, guiding her backward until she sank safely onto the leather sofa. You preserved the logs for counsel? She asked, her breathing shallow, staring up at the ceiling. The file is encrypted on a secure drive. The next call is your legal team, I confirmed. The loop is closed. You stayed, she noted quietly, turning her head to look at me. You could have kept your firewall up and ignored the intrusion. I don't abandon a secure node, I replied, stepping back a pace to give her breathing room. Not when it's worth defending. An hour later, the heavy, metallic hum of county snowplows echoed up the mountain. Selina Ward's bright orange emergency vehicle pulled into the clearing outside the cabin, the beacon lights flashing against the snowbanks. The isolation was officially over. I carried my heavy Pelican case out into the blinding white morning. The freezing air beat at my lungs, a sharp callback to the -12 degrees that had trapped us here the night before. I loaded my gear into the back of the SUV, slamming the tailgate shut. Blair stood on the porch, speaking quietly with Selina. As I turned around, Blair walked across the packed snow toward me. Selina watched from the porch, a clear, public witness to the interaction. Blair reached into her heavy wool coat and pulled out a matte black biometric keycard on a thick company lanyard. Selina, Blair called out, her voice carrying clearly across the frozen air. Clear the roads for my new lead security architect. He has full clearance. Blair turned back to me, holding the keycard out. That opens the executive server room, my private office, and the front door of the building. I looked at the badge. I don't work for conglomerates, Blair. I work for individuals I trust. I know, she said, stepping closer. She placed the heavy plastic badge directly into my gloved hand, her fingers pressing firmly against mine, making sure I took it. That's why I'm giving you the master key to my network. I want a full architectural review on my desk by Monday. She paused, a small, unguarded smile breaking through her CEO armor. I'll be in Aspen by Monday, I told her, slipping the keycard into my heavy coat. You'll have your report and a spare key to my cabin. I make the coffee at dawn, she added softly, her eyes locking onto mine with absolute certainty. Come inside, Justin. Stay on my network. I prefer my coffee black, I replied, the corners of my eyes crinkling against the glare of the snow. It's on my schedule, she said. The end. Closing thoughts. I learned that true security isn't about isolating yourself behind impenetrable walls. It's about finding someone you trust enough to hand them the keys when the alarms go off. Real love is the quiet, methodical consistency of standing side by side when the storm hits. Please like and subscribe so we can share more stories like this.